Well, good afternoon. My name is Mark Skidmore. I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm also serving as the coordinator for the Extension Opioid Crisis Response Work Group. And the work group is hosting a series of webinars to present information about existing programs that have been used for substance abuse and opioid-related activities within Extension. And today we have one more webinar. It's about the PROSPER program, and the title of the presentation is PROSPER, a State System for Delivery of Evidence-Based Programs. And our two speakers today are Richard Spoth and Lisa Shanker. Richard is the F. Wendell Miller Senior Prevention Scientist and the Director of Partnerships and Prevention Science Institute at Iowa State University. He also serves as the Director of the Coordinating Center for the Universal Prevention Curriculum in the North American region. Lisa Shanker has been a research scientist for Partnerships and Prevention Science Institute at Iowa State University, and they're both going to play tag team in the presentation today. So with that, I would like to hand it off to Richard and Lisa. Thanks to both of you for doing this webinar. I really appreciate you sharing this program. I guess it's not quite a program, is it?
No, we'll be speaking to that, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
So thank you, Mark, for the introduction and the opportunity to do this webinar today. Appreciate those of you who can make it on such short notice. We decided to go ahead with this even with the short notice because we knew it would be recorded, so everybody who had some interest could see it at some point. So I'll begin by talking about the title. And as you see that those two words, state system, are in bold. And I would like who's ever listening, if they could, to imagine it being even more bold or larger, because we're going to make a big point today about how PROSPER is a state system, how that is essentially what lies at the heart of PROSPER and connects to both the opportunities that PROSPER represents and the challenges that need to be addressed in order to successfully implement PROSPER. And in fact, I would say that's one of our purposes, to give whoever listens to this some sense of that, how it's essential reality, how its nature of being a system affects both how it can be an opportunity and how it presents challenges.
Ready?
Yep. So that theme will be woven in throughout our webinar today. And basically, this slide highlights the topics we'll be covering. Basically, we will be covering the why, the what, the how, and the where to in the future for PROSPER and those potentially involved with us. So first we'll be talking about the rationale. And that's a lot about the needs that PROSPER addresses, especially in rural areas. Then we'll move to an overview of the PROSPER system. Lisa will pick up there and talk about an overview, which is going to be in part about what it is, as best we can represent it in this short time, and how it operates, especially at the state level. Then we'll talk about research findings and touch on findings specific to opioid misuse, but we consider that another aspect of the why of PROSPER because it relates to potential for community level impact. And then finally, we'll talk about the PROSPER at the national level, and specifically our Prosper Network organization, and how that is designed to support states, how that operates. And that'll set the stage for talking about expectations for states' involvement with Prosper. As I briefly referenced when I talked about Lisa talking about the overview, we're going to do a little bit of tag teaming here. I think this is a first for these webinars. And so we'll be going back and forth to cover the next few slides. So this slide is going to set the stage for a bit of a story, but mostly it's going to be about the compelling reasons for talking about Prosper, but what Extension can do more generally. I know everyone who is listening and will be listening has heard so much and is very familiar with the extent of this crisis, this epidemic. So it's not so much about that, but I want to talk about when it hits home and how that relates to compelling reasons for moving forward with the work that is being promoted by the work group. So when it hits home, that is and was in the title of a conference for which I did a talk. When it hits home, and what struck me about that being in the title was how it relates to staggering statistics that can connect with heart-rending stories about how this crisis is affecting our communities, our families, and our kids. And so I think specifically about what was reported by the Center for Disease Control. In 2016, 63,600 overdose deaths. If I say the number 42,000, I'm guessing a lot of you will have heard that number before. Same year, the overdose deaths specifically connected to opioids. What that means is that in 2016, the number of deaths attributable to addiction and overdose exceeded the number of deaths from motor vehicle accidents. It's one thing to hear those kinds of statistics. It's another thing to connect them to these stories, thousands and thousands of stories, and to the next. Oops. Okay. Trying to get our story here.
No, I really did it.
Excuse us for a moment. It was a pregnant moment. It was about these stories, and I assume that you are seeing what we're seeing, which is a blank screen.
So sorry, everybody.
So we'll try to fix it as quick as we can, and I'll pick up where I left off. Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Sorry.
Thank you. So going with the flow, albeit interrupted a bit, this is what I was referencing, part of what I was referencing when I mentioned heart-rending stories. This is from the Register, as you see, feature in this past January's Register, and it presented the stories of moms who lost their boys. And what you see in that picture is Sandy Eberlin, and pictures of her son, Michael. Michael, I'll just say a bit about what was in the story. Michael was in treatment 19 times. He lost 13 friends before he died. We heard that story. We heard Sandy's story. And then Lisa as part of another grant we're doing that she's the lead on, or designed a workshop. We heard from 2 more moms. It was difficult to listen to. It's especially difficult and hits home when you connect those stories and you amplify them time and time again, thinking about the countless thousands of people who are being affected by this crisis. I think that's compelling. And for me, in this context, talking about this extension-based program, it's especially compelling because extension has such a big, important role to play. There's so much potential, I think, in helping to translate the science of primary prevention into widespread community practice. So I'm not just talking about in any individual program. I'm not talking about Prosper. I'm talking about the sum total of what extension can do to address this problem on a scale that really makes a difference for our kids and families. It's especially an issue in rural areas. This is a quote from Ron Manderscheid that some of you may have seen, but it's about this perfect storm, this combination of factors, combination of conditions, a kind of a nasty confluence of what's happening out there in rural communities. That's summarized by highlighting 2 things. One, how opioid and other drug problems are escalating in rural areas. There's an American Farm Bureau Federation survey that was done last year that indicated that nearly half of rural adults are directly affected. That means they had a problem, somebody in their family had a problem, somebody in their community who was closely connected with them had a problem. When it comes to farmers and farm workers, it jumps up to 75%. It's a growing problem. We recently, one of the work group members shared an article about meth and how that's coming into play, just like heroin had come into play earlier, and basically made this problem worse, especially in some of these rural places. That combines with the service needs. And in that same article that has this quote about the perfect storm, there's reference to 85% of rural counties having only sparse or non-existent services to help the families and kids in those communities address what's going on all around them. Okay, so this is a representation of it. Especially where there are rural counties where services are non-existent. We have been since the beginning of the work we've done at our institute, formerly a center, focusing on what we can do to address the limited accessibility and the stigma of behavioral health services in rural areas. It's even worse when it comes to opioid prevention. There just is barely anything happening that's specifically targeting this issue. So the idea that we'd like to promote is that instead of that, let's build on what's already there. So we know that the extension is in nearly every single county in this country. We know that there are public school systems in every single county in this country. We know that there's about 1,743, not about, but that's the last estimate I heard, where there are public health services available. The idea is behind Prosper and behind the earlier work was to form partnerships with communities facilitated by extension agents or educators, and build a quality, sustainable way of addressing these problems, and expand existing services and programs. A second aspect of what we think can combine to help is using evidence-based programs that are designed for all youth and families. They're universal. They're for everybody in the community. That's kind of been the focus of the work and is at the core of Prosper. And extension, and that connects to developing partnerships that sustain in order to have a continuous system of support for teams that deliver these programs. And there's a special focus because we know it's necessary to realize impact on quality implementation and sustainability. So back to what was in the title and how Prosper differs from a program. It's a state system. And it's our way of putting it in a nutshell. And it's our way of talking about how there are opportunities with Prosper, but there also are challenges. So right there at its center is something that's proven, state-based, and science-driven. We can talk a little bit as we go along about how we integrate the science with the practice. It's a training, technical assistance, and program delivery system that has as its primary purpose of supporting sustained high-quality implementation of individual evidence-based programs, along with, and we'll be talking about this, research-based programs. The one key thing that connects to the challenges is how for this to work on the front end. There needs to be really careful consideration and buy-in across multiple levels within extension, depending on how you think about it. In our state, for example, and I think in many states that we work with, there's a top level of folks at the university, including extension specialists. And then there are regional coordinators or directors, and then the folk at the county level. What this requires is buy-in at all levels. And we, to the point that we had a grant that helped us design a system for helping anyone who wanted to do this, any state, any partners in other states, to kind of figure out if the goals to meet that relate to the needs could be aligned with the goals of Prosper. That connects to another challenge, a very common and frequent challenge, which is that it requires a substantial investment in terms of time, resources, money, and as we'll show, we hope there's big potential return on that, but the investment is across all of those things, having adequate support, having personnel, and that gets into something that has been a theme since we have been working with Extension on all of our universal programs, including Prosper. One prevention coordinator said it well, I think, when he said that what we're having to deal with is how frequently our computer pings, our phone rings, and our door swings to meet some need or to address some concern or to support people who are coming to them for help from their county. The returns concern the public health impacts and then the having some infrastructure to build out from the get-go. I want to turn this over to Lisa. We're going to start moving at a faster pace here. We hope that you get a good sense about the what and the how. But I would be remiss if I didn't go back to what was on the slide at the beginning that I was going to highlight. It's basically 3 shout-outs. One is to our funders. There's a list of them. The lion's share has come from NIH, NIDA. Another is to our partners at Penn State University. In 1998, May of 1998, I wrote a letter about a conference that NIH, specifically NIMH, sponsored with Extension here at this university. And it was about how Extension could facilitate doing NIH kind of science and getting into practice. The kernel of Prosper was in one paragraph in a thank you letter I wrote, to which PSU colleagues responded very quickly, indicating they would love to collaborate. That was Mark Greenberg and Karen Bierman. They joined with Janet Welsh and Danny Perkins, and they have been with us since 2001, when we first wrote the proposal that got funded, and to this day, because our original project continues. So with all of that, we're going to give you a quick overview and talk about findings and next steps.
Okay. All right, so as Dick has mentioned, Prosper is a state prevention delivery system. So what I'm going to do now is go through each of the levels. We think of the state partnership as having 3 tiers. And so I'm going to start with community teams and then move through each of those. So what does Prosper look like at the community level? Well, we have small strategic teams. They start with between 8 to 10 members. They are led by county extension. Usually it's somebody at the county office. It's any kind of staff person. We've had a range of folks take on this role, but it takes about a day a week for them to do this work. We also have a partner from usually the middle school. Sometimes it's a school counselor, sometimes it's an administrator, but having that school co-leader as a partner with the team is huge, because they give the team access to those middle school students and partner with the school-based program, which I'll be talking about in a little bit, but also helping recruit for the other programming that the teams are working on. So in terms of other community volunteers, it's a range, and teams do vary in who's on those teams, but they may include local mental health or public health representatives, substance abuse agency representatives. We always tell them to have some parents that just represent that point of view. And then a lot of teams do find that it's useful to have youth on their teams, because it helps to kind of provide that rounding out the perspective. We make sure that the teams represent the diversity of the communities, which it's really important. And then as teams mature, as they grow into focused on sustainability, they need to include additional members to help with marketing and fundraising activities. So at the prevention coordinator level, their role is really to link the community teams to the state extension system, and they provide technical assistance to their community teams. So this typically requires about a day a week per supported team. And with that time, what they're doing is attending meetings. We think that it's helpful for them to actually be there in person, so that they get that perspective, and they help round out the perspective, bringing in a broader perspective to the local community teams. They're also in contact with the team leaders about every week, and they're discussing what the team leader is doing in terms of moving forward on their activities and their goals that they've set. Prevention coordinators interact with each other. So, if you have one prevention coordinator per community team, then they are able to interact with each other. They're learning from each other. They're sharing what's worked in communities that they're working with, and they help each other problem solve. They also plan professional development activities. So we have things called learning communities, and we have statewide meetings, and that involve all the either the team leaders from all the communities, or actual team members from all the communities that we try to bring together. And we're trying to share with them the strategies that have worked, let them learn from each other. And so that's a big part of this at the state level. So then, as I said, they're acting as the liaison between their community team and the state management team. And I'll talk about the state management team next year. So the state management team's role is to kind of help provide some guidance and oversight for the whole model implementation in the state through this extension system, as well as provide support to those prevention coordinators as they're working with the teams. So they're also going to be involved in working with state agency partners. So a lot of times those might be Department of Public Health, sometimes it's Department of Education or Juvenile Justice. They're helping to explore opportunities for to share resources whenever possible. So, in some cases, these are other agencies where, somebody might be able to do some work as a prevention coordinator as part of their job that's being funded by a different grant or something like that. So we've had a lot of different ways that Prosper is configured in states. And so the state management team is trying to figure out what's going to work best given their resources and other limitations and constraints and opportunities that they have in their states. So another important thing is, this is really about systems change. And so one of the roles of the state management team is to figure out how to, if it started as a grant, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we allow this to become part of somebody's job? How do we get this into their plan of work so that they're able to continue doing this? And then there's some data collection activities. So there's an evaluator who is responsible for helping to collect that information and sharing it with the network team. So in terms of time that's required for a state coordinator, and this is to support up to 4 community teams, it would go up a little bit depending on how many teams there are, or down a little bit if there were only 2 teams, for example. But state coordinators are about quarter time. Evaluators are about 15% FTE, and then a combination of program leaders, other state specialists, or faculty, probably about 15% FTE across the year, and this varies depending on what's going on. So why does Prosper use universal programs and evidence-based programs? Well, first, they address risk and protective factors that are common to multiple types of substance misuse, along with other problem behaviors. So we're getting a lot of bang for our buck because we're addressing the same things that affect a lot of different outcomes. They're strengths-based, which is something that we know Extension views as really important. They're focused on skill building to achieve results. So instead of that focus on, trying to prevent problems, we focus on building skills, building positive parenting, communication, peer refusal skills. So all of the programs are kind of focused on giving parents and youth the skills they need to be successful. And then there's evidence of crossover effects. So this means that even though most of our research has been on substance use outcomes, we've actually shown that the programs have positive effects on, for example, academic success. So again, getting more bang for your buck. And then another really cool thing, and Dick will show some results on this, is that they've been shown to help higher risk youth and families without needing to specifically target them. So these programs are for all youth and families, but when we look at the results, we actually find that while they're not targeted, while you can have them all together in a group, they're actually getting, in some cases, even more benefit than the universal group of families and youth. So in terms of our menu, we have 2 family-focused programs that are currently on our menu, which is Guiding Good Choices and then the SFP 10 to 14 program. And then our formatting's a little off here, apologies. But for our school-based programs, we have the Life Skills Training Program, All Stars, and then Lions Quest Skills for Adolescents. So I'm not going to talk about all these programs. They're evidence-based programs that all have websites. So if anyone's interested, you can certainly go to their websites and and learn more about them. And then they all have their own training and implementation costs. And that's kind of something that's just part of implementation, but not something that Prosper supports directly. We support the technical assistance around recruitment and implementation quality and monitoring, but not the actual training for these programs. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dick.
Thanks, Lisa. Lisa does such a nice job of sort of encapsulating the gist of it. Whenever I give a talk or I'm talking about Prosper, especially if it's one that's limited to 15 or 20 minutes, I mention how it's just a flavor, and then from there it goes to anybody who wants to know more about it. We'll talk about this at the end. We can have you hear from the people who are actually implementing it. So back to the science of it and to the programs that are on the menu. And I know that there was a webinar already on the Strengthening Families program, and this is data from our very first longitudinal study. I'm just going to do quick highlights. In this particular case, we started when the kids were in 5th grade. As you can see in the bar graph, the last data collection was when they were age 25. It's a rigorous study. It's a randomized controlled trial. And at the heart of that is just doing everything we possibly can do so that at the end of the day, when we do our assessments, we can be really confident that when they suggest their intervention control differences, they're really there in the real world. One of the things we do that's probably worth mentioning is that no matter how many people participate in the family program in this case, we collect data from a sample that's intended to represent the entire community population. It's intent to treat, and so it's not just people who've been in the program. The measures are 2 measures of prescription drug misuse, one of which is a global measure, an overall measure. It's a response to the question about ever using multiple types of prescription drugs not under a doctor's orders. We focus especially on narcotics because we know that's where the problem mostly lies. And so the gist of this slide is what is represented in those 2 ovals. Later I'll talk about practical significance, but this represents not only statistical but practical significance. And you see basically how much lower the ISFP rates are compared with the control group rates that are represented in that green oval. As Lisa said, this is about a study that followed the original family program, originally called Iowa Strengthening Families Program, that began in 1990 and funded pilot work in 1991. This is a study that followed it in 96, and the key difference was, along with having the same design and trying to do a rigorous study as best we could, we wanted to combine the family program with a school-based program. LST, you also heard a webinar on that, those of you who listen. The idea was to see what happened when you combine interventions designed to address those 2 primary socializing environments. And in this case, we looked especially closely at whether or not there were comparable benefits for both lower and higher risk subsamples. This slide, like the one before, just shows with the blue, which represents SFP 10 to 14 plus LST, lower rates, through young adulthood, when following these kids from middle school. This looks specifically at subsamples, higher risk subsamples, so not the total sample, and you see here that the findings are more pronounced in this particular case, with the higher risk doing even better than the lower risk or the total sample. Oops. And then we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on this slide, because we've done a series of economic benefit analyses, both cost benefit and cost effectiveness, and work with health economists to make this very conservative. $9.60 return, that specifically concerns prevention of alcohol disorders. We have also looked at meth, and you see comparable, pretty defensible, tested by what they call sensitivity analysis, robust findings for meth as well, and then for other outcomes. And so basically, the point is that the programs on the Prosper menu have economic benefits. So we go back to what Lisa just talked about, and how there's this system, this program delivery system, this infrastructure that's developed to deliver evidence-based programs in the best possible way. Again, because this really captures a couple things I'll mention, but it's one in a series of randomized controlled studies that are longitudinal. This is Prosper, collaboration with our colleagues at Penn State, as I mentioned before. This is what we call a cohort sequential study, 2 cohorts of 6th grade children 5,000, roughly 500 per cohort. We did intensive measurement using videotaping in homes. And again, it's all about being able to say at the end of the day that we're pretty darn confident that the results hold. What are the results? This slide represents results that we looked at fairly early on parenting outcomes. And you'll see a list of what should be familiar, the basic love and limits, showing that warmth in the parent-child relationship increases, or less harsh discipline, more effective discipline, and the family as a whole is more cohesive. We as Lisa said, strengths-based. We look at the skills outcome, and here's a list of the skills for which we have positive results. Everything from problem solving to positive effects on peer networks. We're really excited about all the findings that show Prosper positively influences those networks that kids are in by reducing the influences of kids that are getting in trouble. This is sort of an overview. This is what the positive findings, intervention control difference at 4.5 years past baseline. We've looked at every year before young adulthood, and now we're having 3 data collections in young adulthood. We've published on age 19. The basic point is primary outcomes of interest vary by participant age, but they persist into young adulthood. And here's one key finding that about prescription drug misuse overall and narcotics in particular. And I want to focus in on that second bullet point to get a sense of the practical significance of this. That if everything holds, if Prosper is implemented well, let's say in one community, you compare it with another comparable community that doesn't have it, you would expect that for every 100 young adult misusers, there would be 20 to 26 fewer. And in a minute, I'll show cost effectiveness. And if you think about, in general, economic benefits, and what I think is most important is how this can benefit individual kids and families. If it keeps the kid from not using ever, misusing prescription drugs, or prevents that misuse from escalating into like what happened with Michael Emberlin, and you multiply that by 20 to 26 times in young adulthood, that's the take-home point. So just briefly, Max Crowley, I see the sources on here, a colleague at PSU that did economic analyses. The take-home point was an estimated cost for youth per case, $8,900 cost societal level, $8,965. You can cut that in half or way less than half with Prosper. So Prosper, what does all this mean? It's about real-world implementation systems grounded in extension, the whole idea of science with practice, trying to figure out how to get evidence-based programs into communities, implemented in a quality way and sustained over time. And that where we are now is trying to lay the groundwork for scaling up Prosper. And to that point, and especially in connection with the opioid crisis, we're making some adaptations that, we have some sort of small grants funded to do this. We're making it more streamlined because that makes it more practical in well maintaining an effort to change systems. We're adding components to enhance opioid-related outcomes, some of which you've already heard about in these other webinars. We're figuring out ways to build capacity to support other states, and especially to the point we're working on proposals to get federal funding to help us help other states. So I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Okay. All right. So we have a network, Prosper Network, at Iowa State University. We support a national network of states. We're working with 6 states currently, And our network team is made of trainers. We have TA providers, evaluation specialists, and then senior prevention scientists. So this just kind of shows what this looks like. So the network connects each of these states' partnership systems. So this is showing you, there's 6 states here. Each one has their own structure, and then they're all connected by this network team. So one of the benefits of the network team is that because we're working with all the states, and because we've been doing this for so long with our colleagues at Penn State, we have a lot of experience and knowledge with the way this works in different states, how it works with different extension structures. So we've kind of seen a lot of different things over the years, and help states to problem solve and figure out what's going to work best for them. So in terms of what the team does in supporting Prosper in these states, we have a complete set of implementation materials, including standardized manuals and standardized trainings that we provide. We have tailored ongoing TA for field and evaluation activities. This involves a coach that works with each state, as well as an evaluator that works with an evaluator at the state. We provide annual reports. So there's a lot of information. We've kind of just skimmed over that, but because this is we're implementing evidence-based programs and it's an evidence-based model, what we're really doing is collecting a lot of process information, process data that tells us how well programs are being implemented. So we do observations, the communities do observations of their programs. We also collect data from team members, so we get a sense of how they're thinking things are going. Our prevention coordinators report on their perceived progress, and team leaders report on their progress as well through a benchmarking process. So we use all this information, that some of this is web-based applications and reporting systems, along with sustainability planning and resource generation tools. Some of them may be grant templates or approaches for doing revenue generation and resource generation. We're reaching out to partners and getting funds for sustainability. Using the Prosper brand, what we've found is that a lot of states that are using when state extension systems say we're implementing Prosper, it's helping them get grants funded because that's recognized at this point, with all the research behind it. And the other really great thing about working with the network is because we are, we've been involved with the prevention research field for so long. We're, especially Dick, who is our, director and senior prevention scientist here, provides us with a lot of the guidance on, best prevention practice. So things are kept up to date, and we know how to help states do what's going to make the biggest difference for them. So in terms of how it works, states contract. So usually it's extension systems contract with Iowa State University for implementation support each year. And I've kind of listed out here what that looks like. So there's a Unit 1 training, a Unit 2 training that kind of helps get, what does this look like, getting everybody up to speed on what the roles are and how this works in your system, to selecting your programs from the menu and implementation of the programs, recruitment for your programs, working on, thinking about initial sustainability, that ongoing coaching support, which I talked about, the network support, which is sort of being able to link into the network level learning opportunities, workshops, they may be webinars that we put on, that kind of thing. Evaluation services, so that data that's collected at the state is fed to the network. Then we are able to provide reports back to states, which then they can report that to their funders or report that internally to their extension administrators so that they can show what impact they're having. Online access, so we have a whole resource, just hundreds of resources in terms of meeting agendas for those local teams, just all kinds of different resources that we have. For communities to access at the community level and at the state level, when states decide to adopt Prosper. And then we have a small administrative fee that just helps us with our overhead. And so then in year 2, the costs go down a little bit. We have one less training. And then in year 3, it's more about ongoing support. There are no trainings in year 3. It's just that ongoing coaching, support, and evaluation, and all those other services listed. And then after year 3, it really gets into just whatever a state may need. And so then we kind of negotiate from there. So in terms of the summary of implementation costs, we've kind of covered this, but just to highlight it. So you have your state partnership team, which is going to be your state management team. So this is really the FTEs that we talked about that are required to do this. So it's personnel time. So you have your state coordinator, your state evaluator, your other folks that may help with the implementation support. The prevention coordinator team, you need one per community. Community team leaders, those are our county-based extension staff. One per community there. Then there's costs for trainings, meetings, their trainings that and learning communities, like I talked about. Operations, so community teams often need funds just for doing the business that they do. Maybe recruitment, maybe incentives for programming, those kinds of things before they can actually get that for themselves as they do their resource generation. And then the school and family program implementation, like we talked about, those programs vary depending on, each individual program has their own cost, and that's not included in the Prosper related costs. So really, when states get to that point, they're negotiating directly with the program providers for those trainings and implementation support. And then the contracted Prosper Network support, which we just talked about. So in terms of some potential funding strategies that states have used, there are a few at NIFA that states have been successful with. And one of them, probably the biggest so far, has been the Child, Youth, and Families at Risk, or the CYFAR program. And so we have a number of states that have received funding through CYFAR that have supported Prosper Startup. The Rural Health and Safety Education grant program also has funded some Prosper-related projects. And then, just as we talked about, this is a systems change effort. And so what really needs to happen is, you might get funding to help kind of offset the initial costs of getting this going and all the training and work. But this really comes down to an extension system wanting to put this into what they're doing as part of their work. And so it's about changing what their staff are doing. And so sometimes what happens is, like we said, there'll be an influx of initial funding to support programming. And then the focus is on resource generation and sustainability. And so the Prosper model was designed as a huge part of that, because we know we don't want things to just end as soon as a grant ends. We want it to keep going. And so a huge focus on that. And then we are looking, as Dick mentioned, at looking for some federal funding that might support us, as well as states that are ready to adopt Prosper. So we're really excited about what may come from that. And I don't know if, Dick, you want to say anything else about that before we wrap up here?
Just briefly, that we're pursuing this as best we can because of some of my involvements with various federal agencies, and then also with congressional briefing and follow-ups to that. It's pretty clear, and many of you probably know, that there's a tremendous amount of funding, by one count, $4.3 billion that was in new dollars through the last omnibus funding for this current fiscal year. A lot of that is not focused, most of it, not on prevention, but the expectation is that more and more of it will flow into prevention. Of course, there are other non-federal sources that we're looking at. So we're excited about the prospect of being in a position to get support to build capacity to support states that have interest in that. So it's more of a sort of a collaborative funding model with support from the states and support from Prosper Network.
So we'll wrap up here. Apologies for going a bit long, but we do have a website. So at the helpingkidsprosper.org, you can find out a lot more information about all the things we've talked about. So at this point, we'll open it up to any questions you all have.
Thank you, Lisa and Richard, for sharing all this great information. For those of you who are on the webinar, if you have some questions, you can just type them in the chat. So please feel free to do that. One of the questions that I had was in terms of the local community teams. Are local government or business leaders ever a part of those community teams?
The short answer is yes. And if you remember, what Lisa referenced when she was talking about teams, the expectation is that they'll grow, especially when they get into a sustainability phase. And maybe one of our teams, I mean, we have teams that started with us way back in 1992 that are still going, and they exemplify how this works because they've been so successful in getting sustainability funding. And that often involves business leaders or people who are connected to businesses. And then occasionally with governmental NGOs or whatever, but I would say more often than not, when the teams expand, they involve people who are connected to the business community. Lisa, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, it really varies by community, who's available and who, but sometimes those business leaders are the biggest champions. And having the government is also, can be really helpful in terms of getting the word out and promoting. And so every community is so unique in terms of who the champion is locally. It's really neat to see the variety that they get.
Yes, and so it may be a social service person who's a champion, but that's what often happens is there is a champion, and that champion helps in one way or another connecting to people who have some funds that they can use to support this. But most successful communities have that champion, sometimes a team member, sometimes a participant in the family program. It has varied quite a bit.
Great, thanks. I don't see anybody typing any questions in. Are there questions coming in from the participants?
Since I don't see any either, let me mention one other thing that we can offer, and it's evolved through myriad talks I've given on Prosper, and one of the things that has been helpful when there's enough time is to have somebody who's actually involved at one or more levels, like a community team member, somebody who's on the ground implementing Prosper, and those Prosperites, if you will.
We have one on.
Oh, okay.
We actually have Crystal who could share with us from Virginia.
Oh, yeah,
if
okay.
you wanted to.
We just noticed.
If you all want to hear Crystal's perspective on what it's like to implement this.
What just to turn it over to Crystal, what we could do is invite people who've been doing Prosper in Iowa and other states to talk. And Crystal, if you're there,
she's typing.
Okay.
I'm not sure she can talk actually as a participant. Oh, but she's typing.
I moved her to presenter. If she has audio, she could potentially.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Sorry, Crystal.
That was Lisa's idea.
Sorry.
It doesn't look like she has the capability.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Well.
Saved by the lack of capability.
We were just getting. Yeah, she says we're just getting started. But I know they're really excited about what they've been able to do so far, and in fact, I believe they also got a SciFar grant funded to continue doing some Prosper and expand their Prosper work. So.
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, and we have gone for nearly an hour, and I just want to thank everyone. Thanks to you, Richard, and Lisa for sharing this great information. Thanks to the participants. Before you take off, what I would like to do is just give you an opportunity to provide some feedback. And what this does is help people across Extension who are interested in maybe doing more to address the opioid crisis or substance abuse to learn about this program and some of the other programs that we have going. So I really appreciate you filling out this survey. It'll take you probably about less than 4 minutes, I'm guessing. So just want to put that out there for everyone. And people are saying thank you very much. So I think maybe with that we can close up. We'll leave this open for you so you can click on the survey And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Richard and Lisa.
Yeah, and thank you again for hosting us and hanging in there with us.
Yes, thank you.
Especially through that initial big picture part.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
And Crystal has provided her information if anyone would like to follow up and talk to her about her experience. So thank you, Crystal, for offering.
And all of that information is very useful, so time well spent.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks again.